Professor Montalbano, in 30 secondi siamo pronti.
Mi vedete?
Sì.
Ah, ok.
Può andare, professore.
Okay, so let's start this webinar that is held in cooperation with Sapienza University of Rome, Department of Social Sciences and Economics. This is devoted to one of the hottest topics in the current political debate, migration and illicit trafficking in the Mediterranean. And unfortunately, public opinion, especially in the northern side of the Mediterranean Sea, looks at this area mainly as a threat rather than an opportunity. It is worth recalling and stating here clearly that the Mediterranean Sea is already a common area of economic and social co-development and shared opportunities. Since the Barcelona Declaration in 1995, we have launched the EU-Med partnership. In this framework, we already established three main areas of cooperation. The common area of peace and stability through reinforcement of political and security dialogue, but also construction of a zone of shared prosperity via an economic and financial partnership with establishment of a free trade area. We already established a network of bilateral association agreements between EU member countries and southern Mediterranean countries that provided for the gradual establishment of the Mediterranean free trade area. Under these free trade agreements, currently, all southern Mediterranean countries' industrial goods enter the EU duty-free. And there is also a system of pan-Euro-Med accumulation of origin, also covering agriculture and fishery products. So it's to say the adoption of common standards for identifying the origins of goods. All this is already in place between the EU and southern Mediterranean countries. So we should not undermine all that, all those that were able to achieve up to now in this area. And in this framework, we should for sure also place the activities of the IRINI mission. At the same time, there are surely threats, problems, common issues that we need to face. For this, I would like two main principles. Cooperation. We need to cooperate if we would like to reach shared goals and common results, and awareness. Today's talk about migration is one of the tools to raise awareness among people, but there is a more general need to foster the so-called global citizenship education. Is to say, empowering people to understand that the global issues are important for daily life. I, of course, don't want to take all the time of the discussion, but just a brief introduction. I'm glad to give the floor now for an opening speech to Rear Admiral Jean-Michel Martinet, Deputy Commander of the Operation UNF4 Med Irini. So please, Admiral, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor, and good afternoon to all. I have the honor to do this opening speech for UNF4 Med Irini. In the framework of the CHADMED, the Share Awareness and Deconfliction in the Mediterranean, which is a forum where representatives from different nations and organizations interested in the Mediterranean area can meet to reach common aims, to exchange good practices, and to share information and experiences. We are together today for another event of the Road to CHADMED conference. I recall for the benefit of everybody that this conference will be held in early autumn this year, the 7th and 8th of October. First and foremost, I would like, on behalf of Rear Admiral Agostini, the Operation Irini Operation Commander, to thank our speakers who are about to share with us their view on today's topic, migration and illicit trafficking in the Mediterranean. Thanks also to you, Professor Pierluigi Montalbano, Director of Master in Migration and Development at the University of Rome, La Sapienza, that today you will moderate this webinar that is organized in close collaboration between IRINI and La Sapienza University. In Libya today, despite the establishment of the new government of national unity and the visible efforts to rebuild a fully effective state institution, there is still an enduring proliferation of illicit activities, including human and arms trafficking, but also oil smuggling and the presence of terrorism. This poor situation highlights the need for continued maritime security presence in the central Mediterranean, which is an area where many actors are increasing their footprint to fulfill their own national interest. It is in this context that the European Union has enhanced its supporting activities to enable Libyan ownership of its own security through stabilization and capacity building. Part of these efforts is the Operation IRINI, launched the 31st of March 2020. IRINI is part of a wider process involving political, military, economic, and also humanitarian tracks. IRINI mandate is focused on the implementation of United Nations Security Council resolution arms embargo of the coast of Libya. But one of IRINI's secondary tasks refers to the gathering of information on illicit oil smuggling. And this secondary task is not less important for Libyan economy than any other IRINI's task. Libya has the largest oil field on the African continent. During the civil war, the reduced legal exploitation of oil opened the way for illicit trafficking. Now, today, the production and legal export of oil restart and is back to around 1,300,000 barrels per day. However, it is predictable that the oil smuggling phenomenon will not stop soon due to the enduring presence of criminal organizations involved in illicit trafficking and due also to the unbalanced distribution of legal incomes of oil products. Another task of IRINI is to contribute to the dismantling of the human smuggling business model. To do so, the main EU counterpart of IRINI is the European Border and Coast Guard Agency, Frontex, with whom we exchange a lot. We can say that today the main route used by migrants to reach Europe remains the central Mediterranean. The Libyan Coast Guard and Navy rescue nearly 50% of the migrants that attempt to reach Europe by sea. An increasing number of migrants are departing from Libya in 2021, following the same trend observed in 2020. We assess that the pandemic has been directly or indirectly one of the key causes of this significant increase in migration flow from Libya. It appears that crossing have been rising due to the reduction in controls of Libyan coast by the legitimate Libyan authorities, and because of the condition in detention center unfitted to accommodate a large number of migrants during COVID-19 pandemic. Uniformed IRINI has continuously communicated the activities of the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy in the European arena, underlying the operational efforts done by the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy. It has to be recognized also that the training activity provided by IRINI's predecessor, Operation Sophia, from 2016 till 2019, substantially enables the operational development of the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy, with customized and very valuable, high-level and valuable trainings that were in line with international standards. Therefore, resuming training of the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy will be the most effective method for addressing human smuggling and trafficking. Uniformed IRINI offers its unique training support, especially for those sectors where the EU could provide real add value, such as human rights, gender perspectives, protection of minorities, and proper handling of people rescued at sea. Our distinguished experts are asked today to explore this issue and, preferably, to provide insight on how to better understand the complexity of migration trends and how to prevent and counter illicit trafficking. Let me conclude this opening speech by saying that I hope you will profit from fruitful and enriching exchanges today. And I invite all of you to continue to follow us also during the forthcoming webinars that will lead us to the main event of the year, the CHEDMED 2021 in October. I would also like to invite social media followers to comment freely and openly on the various topics that our excellent speakers will outline during their intervention. Your contribution will be useful and will allow us in IRINI to better develop our communication and our operational activity. Thank you very much for your attention, and I let you the floor, Professor.
Thank you very much, Admiral Martinet, and let's try to understand better this complexity with our guest speakers. Let me briefly present them, and afterwards I will give them the floor. First of all, Emanuela Del Re. She is a former Vice Minister of Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, current EU Special Representative for the Sahel, but forever Professor of Political Sociology and distinguished scholar in her scientific field. Then Lawrence Hart, who is Director of the Coordination Office for the Mediterranean, Chief of Mission for Italy and Malta, Representative for the Holy See of the IOM, and Chiara Cardoletti, Chief of Mission for Italy, the Holy See and San Marino, UNHCR, Emma Bagliardi, Project Manager of our Foundation, that is the Italian representative of Nuestro Pequeños Hermanos. Let me start with Professor Del Re, taking advantage of the opportunity to host her in its new role as special representative for the Sahel. I will start talking about the Sahel, the main region of transit from sub-Saharan Africa, and it's a crucial area for the European Union's policies on migration development. So if Emanuela could say something about that in 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Try to do 3 rounds of roundtables. Thank you.
Yes, no, I'm ready to give a first reply to your suggestion regarding the migration in the Mediterranean in particular, but of course I would like to focus on the Sahel, which I have always defined as the real southern frontier of Europe. And this is the reason why I'm particularly honored to assume this particular role at the moment as European Union special representative for the Sahel, because it really implies a number of responsibilities that, of course, I feel very strongly, but I think are also particularly functional for the development, not only of the region of Sahel, but for the benefit of us all, because, of course, as I mentioned, being the southern frontier of Europe, obviously, it means that the region is particularly strategically crucial for the European Union and our countries in general. Regarding migration, this is one of the reasons why we sometimes talk about Sahel. We don't talk about the culture of Sahel, but we talk about certainly the fact that this is a region in which most of the traffics, I wouldn't say only migrations, take place, but it is, so to speak, an area which constitutes really a hub for a number of movements of people, goods, traffic in general, but also ideas, I would say, that is a particularly important for the destiny of the region and for the global equilibria in general. Regarding migration, because the first question relates to this particular issue, of course, I want to say that we should change the narrative a bit. We know too little about the region. We know too little about Africa in general. Of course, the commander spoke about Libya, but Libya is just the end of a particular route, and of course is one aspect of internal migrations in Africa. Because I would like to say that migration from sub-Saharan sub-Saharan Africa to the north are much more complicated than just saying people walk through the desert or cross the sea and end up in Europe. In fact, the majority of migration related to the Sahel is intra-regional and legal, thanks to the free movement protocols that apply to most states of West Africa. The situation is completely different from what the usual narrative depicts. In fact, I want to say that migration within the region represents about 90% of the total migration in West Africa. This intra-regional migration is at least 7 times greater than migration movements to Europe. This should make us think about, for instance, the huge burden that the countries have to carry, the strategies that they have developed, of which we don't know anything, we never mention them, such as, for instance, the fact that ECOWAS, which is the authority of heads of states and governments of the Economic Community of West African States, has adopted a free movement protocol already in 1979. Can you imagine? So this changes the picture a lot. Of course, what is interesting for us is to know who arrives in the Sahel, who departs from the Sahel towards Libya in particular, and then probably, if they don't end up in the detention camps, crosses the Mediterranean, risking once again their life. Of course, we have a number of projects. There is a very good, I would say, cooperation. I have to be short. I would like to be in details, but just to give you hints for reflection, there is a very good cooperation at bilateral level between different countries. Italy is one of them, of course, but also bilateral and multilateral. And of course, with the countries of the Sahel themselves. For instance, I would say that Niger is one of the most cooperative countries, and that we have to praise Niger for this, because they are changing a lot of their internal policies to welcome refugees. They have a huge number of IDPs as well, for instance, and we should consider also that. But also they are cooperative in the sense that they participate in the system, which has been as derived from the awareness of needing to respond to migrations. In fact, there are we as Italians and also the European Union, we finance projects with the UNHCR, with the IOM. It's a system that is developing that can bring good fruits. And what are the good fruits we are expecting? The fact that we find finally better solutions than those of responding to emergency. We find structural responses, which means that, for instance, we apply in a larger scale what has already been developed in a good way, starting from Niger itself, such as the humanitarian corridors, which are ways of identifying vulnerable people and groups and transferring them in a safe manner to Europe, allowing them to develop their own project of life and becoming integrated in our own societies. This is obviously a way of overcoming the security issues that we would raise, thinking who's the person who's coming, and at the same time would, of course, give an opportunity to the people who deserve to be given an opportunity. This is just one of the examples. I'm fighting for humanitarian corridors to make them become European corridors. So we want to develop alternative ways of looking at migration, and I think taking Sahel as an example of things that are happening on field and are happening in cooperation with international organizations, single countries, and in general in a system, integrated system, I think this could be a very good way of looking at the future, especially for the benefit of all, as you, Pierluigi, were saying at the beginning. So thank you. I stop here for the moment. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Manuel, also because we had time to have other rounds of talk. Let me move to Lawrence Hart, if he can provide some figures and data about arrivals.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Professor Montalbano, and to everyone online. My special regards also to the other panelists, specifically the Special Representative Emanuele Del Re and Chiara Cardoletti, with whom we have almost daily contacts, or we had daily contacts to collaborate. I think Mr. Ray has actually sort of hinted already that this is a phenomenon that is very complex, and there is a need to unpack this complexity in order to understand it more and thoroughly and counter that toxic narrative that Professor Montalbano, you were referring to when we started the discussion, a toxic narrative on migration, which is not just in this region, but is worldwide due to a number of political reasons, especially electoral reasons that we are witnessing everywhere in the world. But coming to your question, I'm going to give you some figures and some facts in order for us to focus a little bit, zoom into this specific region. Now, these are figures, of course, we should remember that are numbers, but behind each number there is a person. It's a little bit when we are used to looking at the COVID number of infections, we see numbers and we sort of get used to seeing this as figures and numbers rather than people. And it's really important to focus on the many women, children, men that are victims or of a lot of tragedies which have been occurring, not just in the Mediterranean, but also further afield in the deserts, and oftentimes which remain unreported. So let me just go in the first half of 2021, in Italy, we have had just over 20,000 arrivals, 20,500 arrivals from January to June, so very recently. And the main nationalities are Bangladesh, Tunisia, Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, Eritrea, Sudan, and Guinea. And the main departure country where they arrive in the European Union space is Libya, and is constituted by 62%, which is up from 38% in 2020. And Tunisia, which is at 22%, which is down from 43% last year in 2020, followed by Turkey, Algeria, and Greece. This year, there has been an increased share of children, adolescents, and especially unaccompanied and separated children. And these represent 23% of the total arrivals, while women are 7% and men 70%. Most of the unaccompanied separated children are from Bangladesh, Tunisia, Guinea, and Egypt. In Malta, in 2021, we have had only 250 arrivals, and the main nationalities are represented by Sudan, Eritrea, and Bangladesh. When it comes to Libya, the number of returned migrants to Libya in the same period, so the 2021, is already higher to that of returned during the whole 2020. We are now at 15,000 approximately versus 11,000 or 12,000 last year, and higher than those reaching Italy from Libya. When it comes to Tunisia, the Tunisian Coast Guard rescued and returned 5,500 individuals. Some departed from Libya, close to the number of those reaching Italy from Tunisia over the same period, which are around 4,500. When it comes to dead and missing, the number of those estimated to have died at sea in the central Mediterranean, on the central Mediterranean route, is now at 898 people, and is already close to those died last year, which are 983. There are more departures and less search and rescue vessels at sea, and this obviously makes the number, puts the figures higher. And another element is that the shipwrecks, both in front of Libya and Tunisian coasts, are frequent. Also close to the Italian island of Lampedusa as well, are frequent, and the number of dead and missing are underestimated for sure. We also have a contribution from the NGOs in the rescue of migrants, which oftentimes have difficult time in finding a safe port to disembark, and sometimes their vessels get administratively seized. And other major, just to conclude, to give you this bird's eye view, the more general trends, Nigeria, Eritrea, and Tunisia are the top 3 nationalities for the whole 2016-2021 period. Nevertheless, departures from Tunisia and of Tunisians have gained importance and became the first group of arrivals since 2018. Departures from Libya were the majority in 2016 and 17, and then again in 2021. Main nationalities of departures from Libya are Bangladesh, Eritrea, Egypt, Sudan, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, and other sub-Saharan nationalities. As I said, most migrants are young adult males, which are around 70 to 75% nowadays, and most of the children are unaccompanied, are in their 15 to 17 years old. Women are the smaller group over the entire period altogether. Now, this obviously opens up again a layer of complexity, because each of these countries, but also these categories of people, require tailor-made response. But I'll leave it at that at this point. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Hart, for giving a comprehensive picture about the data, and also mentioning that indeed it's not just numbers, but people, histories behind that. And for that, I would give the floor to Chiara Cardoletti to talk about the so-called push factors. There is a whole debate in Europe about the so-called pull factors, but there is much less awareness about the push factors from the origin countries. So please, Chiara Cardoletti, the floor is yours. You are muted, I guess.
I have this thing about talking to myself.
Okay.
I was saying, thank you so much, Professor Montalbano. Greetings to the panelists, especially Madonna Del Re, for all the work that we have been doing together over the years, and for your incredible engagement. And of course, Lawrence, for our daily work in issues that we share. I'd like to, in response to your question, Professor Montalbano, take it back to the narrative. The narrative, which for us is extremely important, because indeed there is often discussion about pull factors, but here we are dealing with a situation where the push factors are so tremendously great that it's almost ironic that people should be talking about pull factors. Especially when Del Re was talking about the situation in the Sahel. Certainly an extraordinarily complex environment in which to operate, that is producing millions of internally displaced people. But the situation is much broader, much broader. We are now at 82 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes, whether internally or across borders. Little does it matter, because there's such incredible fluidity in these movements. And we are now perhaps at the 9th consecutive year where we have not seen a reduction in the numbers of people who have been forcibly displaced. And why am I putting so much emphasis on the forcibly displaced? It's because when they become refugees, there is obviously a very clear responsibility engaging governments and countries in the reception and in their treatment. We are dealing with numbers never seen before, whereas especially what Del Re was describing, where the majority of them, over 90%, are hosted in neighboring countries. So whether it's the 6.7 million Syrians who've been displaced, hosted in Lebanon, in Turkey, and in Jordan, or whether it's the Venezuelan outflow, which has now over 4 million people displaced, and they're mostly accommodated in countries such as Colombia, Ecuador, etc., or whether it's Afghanistan and the super now 10 years long-standing conflict that has seen the majority of the Afghans at the end of the day being accommodated in Iran and Pakistan. So everywhere we look, we are looking at situations where neighboring countries, despite their challenges, despite the context, have still been able to open up their doors, receive, accept, and support refugees from all over the world. And so at the end of the day, who arrives in Europe, the numbers that Lawrence was describing is an incredibly minimal number, and very much not descriptive of the context in which we are seeing. It's quite frightening to see the numbers everywhere else. So here, at the end of the day, the issues remain quite limited, quite manageable, and obviously we advocate for those numbers, for those people that we are seeing to be handled properly, and that's a real issue, because as we all know, what we are seeing is obviously political narratives that are not always helpful, and a management of the issues that is not always as effective as we would like to see, starting very much from the whole issue of rescue at sea. And that, Lawrence said it, I will repeat it, and I keep on repeating always the same issues. Rescue at sea cannot remain in the hands of a few actors who are obviously doing great work, but that require a lot more support when it comes to intergovernmental efforts to rescue people. We have seen hundreds of people already dying this year in the seas. So that's obviously one area that we very much strongly advocate. The other issue that I think is becoming more and more worrisome is the whole issue of trafficking. It is worrisome because it seems to be obviously the driving force in a sea of lack of action in many different ways of addressing migration, managing refugee flows, which then end up being managed by traffickers and smugglers. And I'm not just talking about the northern routes and the central Mediterranean routes and what is happening in the Sahel, etc. But I'm also talking about what happens in industrialized countries, where trafficking still remains an issue that is very much unaddressed and untouched. And so that obviously fuels, not just a situation of social distress, but also a pull factor in many ways of people coming through to Europe. So many different issues, a super complex issue, but at the end of the day for us, what really remains important is that migration and refugee flows are managed, that people are rescued at the sea, and that who are more and more extraordinarily vulnerable people, particularly those coming through Libya, are actually supported in the process of integration in our countries, in the countries of arrival. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cardoletti. And moving from the global picture, I would give the floor to Emma Bagliardi to introduce the mission of the Rava Foundation and which are the main areas of intervention that the organization get involved in the Mediterranean. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Montalbano. I want to thank Admiral Agostini for inviting us, and Rear Admiral Martinet for hosting this event today, and hello to all the panelists here today. Let me spend a few words to frame out how the Fondazione Francesca Rava got involved with EUNAVFOR-Med in the capacity building activities. The Francesca Rava Foundation is an independent, non-political, charitable, no-profit foundation whose mission is to help vulnerable children in serious need in Italy and worldwide through medical, educational, development programs, and emergency response projects. The Fondazione represents in Italy NPH, Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos, and it's an organization that helps orphans and abandoned children in Central and South America since 1954. As a designed United Nations civil society organization, NPH has chosen to focus on furthering a few of the sustainable development goals, which are the blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. And the global challenges that we decided to face as a priority are number 1, zero poverty, number 3, health and well-being, and number 5, gender equality. And this is also the direction the foundation is heading to in the projects that we follow and we care and then we take up in Italy. Coming to our experience in the Mediterranean, if the technical assistant wants to release the first photo gallery, please. Coming to our experience in the Mediterranean, it stems from the collaboration with the Italian Navy. It all started in 2010 on the occasion of the Haiti earthquake, when Operation White Crane was set up to bring immediate help to the Haitian population. And the operation was based at our hospital, our St. Damien Hospital in Port-au-Prince, the Center of International Relief. This collaboration brought along and was consolidated with a framework partnership agreement for humanitarian purposes that lasts to this day. And it soon took to the front line, first of all in Africa, in 8 African countries, where we developed a project within the Third Naval Group campaign against blindness. But most of all, between 2013 and 2018, at the peak of the emergency in the Mediterranean, our medical teams specialized in the emergency maternal and child areas were continuously embarked on the ships of the Italian Navy during Mare Nostrum and Mare Sicuro operations. It was a big effort on our part. We are a small organization, but all in all, a total of about 300 volunteers, doctors, midwives, nurses, assisted about 150,000 people, including thousands of pregnant women and thousands of minors. We assisted hundreds of women in labor and many deliveries at sea. So such a long-lasting engagement allowed us to build a lot of experience regarding, for instance, migrant women, victims of violence, as it was mentioned before, unaccompanied children, those same kids that we happen to meet again very often in the communities we support all over Italy, and also, unfortunately, in the youth jails, such as the Beccaria jail in Milan, where we are developing projects. Parallel to that, we promoted continuous training and updating activities for the crews in the naval bases on topics such as first aid, infection diseases, and obstetric and pediatric emergencies. The collaboration also extended to the students of the Naval Academy. Last but not least, the psychological aspect of both migrants and crews engaged in the save and rescue events was addressed with an innovative project named Psychologist on Board, conceived by our volunteer psychologist, the late Diletta Del Bono, together with the medical and psychological component of the Navy Ministry. All these activities in the front line led us to the capacity building activities that we performed, and we're probably going to continue performing with EUNAVFOR Med, but we'll talk about this later.
Thank you very much for the capacity to give a snapshot of these important activities in 5 minutes. And complexities mean also the capacity to link operations on the ground with macro relation and macro analysis. So let me go back to Emanuela Del Re to discuss about in a more geopolitical point of view, the fact that the EU in the area faces the competition, or maybe the cooperation of other regional and international superpowers like Turkey or China. So, in your opinion, what are the challenges of this relationship in the area?
Thank you very much for this question, very important question. Of course, you were mentioning competition. I don't like this word, forgive me, because I think that Europe cannot be in competition, because Europe has got its own unicity, its own specific character, its own history, and especially a very long standing and very solid relationship with the area, in particular in Sahel, but I would say in the African continent in general, and in the Mediterranean in particular, because of course, you know, Europe is particularly active in that particular area. I would like to say, instead of competition, that in fact, the fact that other powers are interested in the area is a good sign that it could be actually exploited positively, in the sense that we have understood very well that in recent times, of course, this region has become a worrisome area for many because of a number of challenges, such as, for instance, the climate change and its effect, of course, terrorism and extremism, the demographic dynamics, and also some exploitation for resources, of course, that could be in the future an important reference, especially at the economic level. Nevertheless, I would say that, of course, China, Turkey, the Gulf states have increased their stakes in the region because they understand that anyway the stabilization of the region means also that there will be stabilization also in their own areas, and we know very well that we're all interconnected and interdependent. I think nevertheless that, of course, we as Europe are not acting as some powers with, let's say, a river of money that could cover a number of activities in both economic field and development field very rapidly, and in some cases covering some emergencies. We are considering to develop a proper long-term strategy which could be really sustainable and could really bring a permanent change to the region, meaning that we are perfectly aware of the risks of related to security, and therefore we want to be there to help especially the local security forces to develop their own abilities and their own strength and of course skills on the ground. But at the same time, we are very aware of the fact that unless we link this with the development strategies based on sustainability, not just emergency, we are not going anywhere. From the political point of view, I want to say that the European Union has gone through a cultural revolution recently. I have to say that probably not many people noticed, but during the pandemic, for instance, we started talking continuously of a partnership with African countries. And this means that we have changed our perspective. We are not talking about third countries, developing countries. We are talking about partners. And in fact, in the latest strategy of the European Union for the Sahel, but not only for the Sahel, this is obviously reflecting a general attitude. There is a very strong concept that talks about mutual responsibility. If this is not a revolution, tell me what is a revolution. Because honestly, I mean, we have waited for so many years, if not centuries, to arrive to this point. And I think it's about time that we start working and building on this awareness, which has really changed the situation very clearly. What I can say in conclusion is that relating to migration, relating to humanitarian problems, I don't want to go deeply in the fact that, of course, we have to work for governance, because unless we have good governance, of course, we cannot implement any reform. We cannot guarantee that people change their status, that some sort of a citizenship is implemented, that people can actually access to minimum basic services. And this is something that we want to transfer as our own experience to the regions and to them. On the other hand, I want to tell you that, of course, there are other options that are coming into the horizon of the populations of Africa in general, in Sahel in particular. Turkey and China offer their own system, their own model. What we want is to keep the European Union in the track, and especially for the European Union to remain the best, the most credible, the most reliable option for the populations of Sahel and of Africa in general. I think that we can do it, because we have the moral authority, we have the experience, we have built our own societies based on state of law. If we implement this and we continue in believing in this, and we go straight on the road towards the nexus between security and development, I think we can achieve good results. And the basis is there, and I tell you, I feel the huge responsibility in my new role, because this would be one of my tasks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuela Del Re. I agree that cooperation, partnership are the main targets, but actually I don't think competition is actually such a bad word. It comes from the ancient Latin competere, that means heading together towards an achievement. So it's the way in which we use nowadays this word a little bit different. So moving to Mr. Hart, heading together in terms of managing the current situation of migration in the Mediterranean Basin, what we need to do.
Well, obviously, I don't have the magic stick. As you said, it's a question of cooperation, partnership, competition, however you want to put it. But it is indeed something that we need to definitely work more together with the actors which are currently involved and beyond. Perhaps a few points that although this year we have registered an increase in arrivals compared to last year, at the end of June, as I said, 2020, the arrivals were about 77,000 versus the 20,000 registered this year. This is not an emergency in terms of numbers. And I think my colleague Chiara has mentioned other scenarios and settings where the numbers are by far much more significant. Now, these numbers are not even comparable to the arrivals recorded in the period of 2014 and 2017. So this is a humanitarian emergency rather than numerical emergency, which oftentimes the media wants us to believe that it's a numerical using also the word invasion. Now, what are the concerns and the solutions? I think the first concern is the fact that there is a lack of a patrolling system at sea comparable to that of a few years ago, and there is also a lack of a predictable and safe disembarkation mechanism. At the moment, migrants needing rescue sometimes have to wait hours, if not days, before the distress call is followed by an intervention. And given the unseaworthy condition of such vessels or their boats, which can sink at any time, this slow response does cause and may cause shipwrecks, as was, for example, the case of 130 migrants who died in April after having waited to be rescued for more than 24 hours. Now, this is something that there's nothing that we should, we can look back in the history of the Central Mediterranean, and we can see that this predictable and safe mechanism was something that was a model for many other parts of the world, because it did provide rescue to vulnerable people. And this is indeed important to reinstate as soon as possible. Now, the second point that I would like to make is the role of the Libyan Coast Guard, which has brought back more than 15,700 people to Libya only this year, and while last year were about 12,000. Now, it means that in 2021, about 1 out of 2 migrants departed from Libya has been intercepted at sea and returned to Libya. And why is it a concern? Because Libya is still an unsafe port. And we want to reiterate that. And there's nothing against Libyans. It's about the infiltrations of certain elements within also the Libyan Coast Guard, which makes this situation very dicey. Migrants rescued in international waters, even those rescued in what is considered the Libyan search and rescue zone, should never be returned to an unsafe ports, because those sent back to Libya are taken into arbitrary detention, and we're talking about women, children and men, and in inhumane conditions, and are at risk of becoming victims of serious abuse and violence. Until a few weeks ago, there were about 5,000 migrants detained in Libyan detention centers. So the partnership with Libyans is absolutely of key importance. And it's important also to make sure that there is a burden sharing mechanism for everyone. The concern from the Libyan side is obviously the one that has to face ultimately the burden of a lot of migrants versus the European space. So that work, of course, is not an overnight. It's not an overnight job, but it's indeed very important to carry on with the partnership and make it more predictable and more transparent. Needless to say that the conditions in the centers are increasingly difficult. Oftentimes, the role of many NGOs, including IOM as a UN agency and others, are to provide blankets, non-food items, and hygiene kits, but with sometimes little possibility or power to ensure that human rights are respected inside the centers. We are also fearful of that fate of several thousands of migrants who have been returned to Libya, of whom we have no news. We fear they have been probably sold to militias who then usually torture them for extortion or exploit them in several ways. And I think I also want to reiterate something about push and pull factor. We should say that the violence in Libya remains the real push factor. A lot of migrants do see Libya not just as a transit option, but as a destination possibility because there is a lot of need for manpower. So we have to also be very careful in the narrative when we talk about push and pull factors. And then finally, ultimately, I'm very conscious that I'm being very brief, but I'm happy to expand at any time further. Now, the distinction between migrants and refugees, when it comes to people leaving Libya and who have experienced traumatic experiences during their journey, is very complex. In fact, it has to be considered that those migrants who would initially be start out as driven by economic factors, when they arrive in Libya, can often become victims of abuse, violence, serious human rights violation, and therefore have to be considered vulnerable. Therefore, it is essential to ensure that protection mechanisms provided for certain vulnerable categories in Europe, in Italy, and international legislation are properly activated. For example, for victims of trafficking or unaccompanied minors. Often the assistance is belated or not discovered, leaving these migrants, especially women from certain areas of Africa, who are often exploited and often disappear. And if people cannot access international protection or cannot be returned, a form of protection is provided, allowing them to remain legally in European territory, as it happened, for example, with the humanitarian protection abolished in 2018. So I'll leave it at that for the points. Over.
Thank you. Let me listen to these also, Ms. Cardoletti. It's just a matter of changing our asylum policy, or rather to build up a more comprehensive European system of integration and inclusion. You're again muted.
In terms of how we address this complex issue, I obviously subscribe to pretty much anything that Lawrence has said in relation to the very complex issue linked to rescue at sea, returns to Libya, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go back there again. But I do want to say that we do need a much more comprehensive set of responses, and starting from what Special Envoy Lerre was saying, that we do need, first and foremost, a policy of external dimension of the European Union that does look at providing meaningful support and stabilization in those areas where there are a higher number of persons who are displaced and who are obviously looking for solutions. So the less solutions we provide, obviously, in neighboring countries, the more likely it is that the people will take the future in their own hands and will move onward. So a very comprehensive, sustained, and partnership-like approach to countries that are supporting a great number of refugees is certainly number one priority. The second important priority is obviously trying to undermine and undercut this whole trafficking phenomenon, which is, I must say, extraordinarily well organized. And clearly, the whole issue of prosecution and understanding the issue not just from where they're coming from, but where they are now, and where I do believe that a much more coherent way to sort of bring together the various laws and policies in relation to trafficking could really help undermine also the phenomenon. Number three, obviously legal channels. Special Envoy that I was talking about, secure, legal, safe pathways for arrival into Europe. Absolutely. We have estimated that only 1% of the population under our responsibility could benefit from these channels. Yet we are every year under resourced and under extreme challenges in finding places for people who are either medically ill, with very serious protection issues and unable to access a third country. So legal channels will certainly open the door for more secure and safe pathways, and it's currently the case. But that should not go, obviously, at the expense of access to asylum upon arrival, but whether this is by sea or whether this is by land. And this I'd like to make parentheses, particularly when it comes to Italy, but not just Italy. We are talking a lot about arrival by sea, but it is more and more evidence that people are arriving by land, and I'm not entirely sure that the experiences of those people arriving by land is any better than those arriving by sea. In fact, sometimes they're worse, and there is very little in place for these people to be received and supported. So the whole notion of arrival by sea obviously is there, but we also should be looking at what happens to those arriving through to Europe, through the Balkans in particular, by land. And then finally, I do believe that obviously the narrative, the media, what we're seeing every day in terms of anxiety and the way we are communicating these arrivals, which are quite limited in terms of the global phenomenon of the problem, is certainly the need to make sure that upon arrival there are solid systems for reception and integration. And we cannot, I cannot underestimate how weak it currently is. It's weak for refugees, it's weak for migrants, and does not provide pathways for integration, which means that if there is a further fueling of this narrative, then we cannot manage, which I think I think in a country that is struggling to maintain cities alive, in a countries where there is need for labor, in a countries where there's so much tradition of hospitality, I think we could do a lot more to sort of find creative ways to integrate people who do have skills and do have a real drive and desire to succeed. So I think there's a lot more we could do.
Thank you very much. And I think to reinforce the entire system integration, we need activities. But a side issue when we are talking about the activities is also that of the efficacy. If we are able to assess the capacity of projects to provide concrete outputs and outcomes. So let me move again to Emma Bagliardi, if she can say something about the outcomes, the results of their activity in cooperation with the IRINI mission.
Yes, in 2017, the Rava Foundation and Sofia signed a working agreement for cooperating activities within the training program, the capacity building program offered by Sofia to the Libyan Navy and Coast Guard, specifically training modules in medical subjects and medical screening of candidates. Training of Libyan personnel was provided in order, of course, to improve the safety of Libyan territorial waters and the capacity of the Libyan Navy to carry out search and rescue activities, and finally, I would say, to save lives during the search and rescue interventions. Our goals were and still are to improve the medical service to people rescued at sea, empowering each and every trainee with a personal set of skills. Thank you for the photo gallery. And ultimately also pass on the idea that the capability to intervene to save a life is a universal moral and ethical value and knows no political or religious boundary whatsoever, or at least it should. The Foundation's contribution was made possible thanks to the availability and commitment of our qualified medical personnel who had already participated in several projects in Haiti and also in the Mediterranean emergency. We were able to define the concept and the format of the lessons. The lectures encompassed the theoretical but mostly practical aspects by staging real life scenarios and taught the most sensible ways, the most sensible responses to assist individuals rescued at sea. Our specialists produced a syllabus that was constantly updated and remodulated to meet the expectations and the needs of the trainees. After the first two medical vetting missions in Malta and Taranto, the first training activity that we organized took place in October 2017 in Taranto. 87 officers and tutors of the Libyan Coastal Guard participated in a training that included a week-long first aid courses for adults, children, pregnant women, and also a special section on dead body management. Our teaching staff then became our basic team, included a gynecologist, a pediatrician, a surgeon, an emergency room nurse, and a coroner. In the following months, we developed another 10 first aid and resuscitation modules. And we were able to train dozens of officers and lower rank officers of the Libyan Coastal Guard. All in all, it was for us, from our point of view, it was a rewarding experience. The feedback from most of the participants was good enough, and all the trainees showed to be very interactive and responsive, particularly when it came to dealing with pediatric first aid and care. So from our point of view, the outputs were positive from an educational point of view. Of course, we cannot ourselves precisely measure the outcomes. I'd like to say we saw a seed.
Thank you very much. I really hope to have the time for a last round. Maybe we should restrict the replies even further to 1-2 minutes. And because I think it is important give the chance to Manuela Del Re to present a little bit more in detail the European strategy and specifically her role and mandate as a EU Special Representative for Sahel.
Thank you, Pierluigi. Well, let me make a terminological clarification. I'm not a special envoy. I'm a special representative, and I want to explain the difference. There is a need to tell the difference because the special envoy usually is somebody who's acting on behalf of a specific country, while the special representative, and here you see the huge responsibility that I have representing the European Union, is representing 27 countries, of which, of course, we know there are many different attitudes, many different cultural traditions, many different political positions, although, of course, because we are a big family in the European Union, we share, the overall values and attitudes towards, the geopolitical issues. So I just wanted, forgive me for clarifying, but I think it's important to say that because there is a huge difference between being a special envoy working for your own country and having to deal with 27 countries, representing them and making sure, of course, to be, the catalyzer that can put all the actors in a system, which would be beneficial, of course, both for Sahel and the European Union. This means that, of course, my mandate is very wide. I would like to say that, and I think this is good news, especially for those who are following this very interesting seminar, the level of activities that are related to my role and in general to the European Union acting in the diplomatic system and also in foreign policy are immense. What we get as a narrative in our own countries, and I'm not only talking about Italy, is a minimum compared to the really frenetic and frantic activity that is carried out. For instance, consider that the countries of Sahel in particular, but of course this applies also to others, to other special representatives. In my particular area, there are a number of international organizations. The country themselves have a huge amount of activities. There is an interlocution ongoing on a daily basis. Of course, there are proposals, not to mention development cooperation. You know that when I was the deputy minister, I was also in charge of development cooperation for more than 3 years. And this means that I know how it works and I know how huge this important packet of activities is. Of course, I have a mandate that covers virtually everything from maritime security, and this I say for our friends from Irini, to, of course, all social issues, political issues, and Alliance Sahel, G5 Sahel, all the activities and regional organization, as well as international organization, as well as country organization, and so on. One thing regarding migration, I can say, I would define it in sociological terms a sort of dependent variable, in the sense that it is something that is always present, but is a chapter that is included in the mainstream of some specific policies. For instance, governance. Of course, governance is fundamental, but also redesigning the some economic and development intervention means that you also intervene and have an influence and an impact on migration. So it's a dependent variable, transversal, always present, particularly relevant because we care for the people. And I have to say that this is the most important thing, also for the G20 in Italy, which was shared by 20 countries, such as persons, for instance, planet and prosperity. And I think that this, if we can put it in a system, and I am called to this very, let's say, challenging task, of course, it's something that can really change the lives of people. And of course, a seminar like this and people like you are needed. So I really count on all of you for my future activities, because it's very important that we keep the interlocution, at a really wide range to obtain the maximum. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. I imagine that you are referring to international organizations, but also we as universities are ready to collaborate.
Pierluigi, I'm an academic. Of course, the academies are at the center. In fact, there are very important academies in Africa, which can be real partners for us, because they have a huge amount of human resources that can be incredibly precious, especially to make our own development go on. Thank you.
That's very important. There is already a sort of academic network already across different universities all over the world. So, Mr. Hart, are you ready to collaborate?
Yes, indeed, absolutely. We want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem, obviously. Obviously, I want to underline that indeed the academic world has a huge role to play, especially when analyzing this situation. I think a lot of the misinformation is because we don't rely on hard facts, or hard facts are actually not necessarily accessible and need to be somewhat vulgarized or disseminated more. Just let me give you one figure. In Italy, 9.5% of the GDP is provided by the contribution of the work of migrants. Now, this is important because it does give us a signal that the migrant contribution is key to the development of societies in the European Union. And let me say that this 9.5% represents the work of sometimes very precarious conditions. If we were to better the conditions for migrants, probably the contribution of the GDP to the GDP would be even higher. So the role of indeed of the academia is incredibly important in providing those facts and going for us beyond that anxiety and that emergency attitude which were highlighted by other speakers before. But also, indeed, the role of, I must say, and I want to underline the important work of the Coast Guard, because the Coast Guard is, relentlessly working when it comes to saving lives. Their commitment in often difficult, perilous conditions is actually remarkable. The standard operational procedures is what probably need to be worked on in order for them to be even more effective in their commitment and work. And let me also say, picking up on what the special representative, I was going to say special envoy, but the special representative Emmanuel de Rey was mentioning. We need to think a little bit now about the future scenarios, and I think we have to educate ourselves to look forward. For example, it was mentioned also labor migration or complementary pathways. How do we translate that operationally? How do we look at making arrivals predictable for the needs of the societies, but how do we make it also for Libya predictable? It's undoubtable that Libya, for example, in a few years, when the situation will have stabilized, will be in need of a tremendous number of manpower to refurbish, start up infrastructural renewal, etc. How is that going to be organized? How is the competition between Asia and Africa going to be managed? This is something that we need to think now, because otherwise we're going to have asymmetric situations causing more damage than benefits. The other element which I would like to the final element which I would like to highlight, and again, for the sake of brevity, I'm containing myself. Indeed, migration is not a standalone element. Migration is part, as Manuel de Rey was mentioning, is part of other elements as well. Food systems, environment, for example, which are the great appointments of this year with the COP26 and with the Food System Summit. All these contain an important migration pillar. Today, if the food system is working, is also thanks to migrants, but there are asymmetries, and we need to look at the asymmetric, how do we correct those asymmetries in those processes? And we need to look at migration not just as a standalone big issue, but something that is there to stay and there that we need to mainstream it in other areas. Thank you very much. Over.
Thank you very much. We're all pieces of a complex system, and interdependence is the key word that also Manuela de Rey mentioned before. What about the UNHCR?
All right. So what about UNHCR? Well, going back a little bit to the Sahel and the role of the special representative, I have to say that for UNHCR at the moment, there is no more important emergency. We are seeing a displacement and a brutality of the displacement that is unprecedented over recent years, which is expanding, which is reaching coastal areas throughout the Sahel, and we are very worried about the implications that this will have, obviously, for people and for their ability to sustain themselves, but also for what that will mean for potentially for migration, especially at a time when food security is sparse and where food distributions are being reduced. So in the Sahel, certainly for us, incredible attention on what is happening. UNHCR has developed a new strategy for intervention in areas where security is extremely challenging, and where we still need to operate despite that. So obviously our cooperation with the European Union and with all countries who are involved in the Sahel will continue. UNHCR is a field-based organization, and we will continue to be there and try to provide an all analysis of what's happening in the Sahel, what we see through the lens of forced displacement, but also making sure that interventions are sustainable and they do bring about a sort of a level of relief for people who are being displaced, but also for communities who are increasingly having to tackle a very complex phenomenon in the Sahel.
Thank you. And in terms of projects, what are the new projects that our foundation is planning to do with the Irini mission?
Yes, a very quick answer here. A few months ago, the foundation signed a working agreement with Irini that aims at developing a cooperation to achieve security at sea through the dissemination of first aid skills, and as a consequence to make a positive impact on individuals. This collaboration, of course, consolidates what has already been done and what has already been expressed by the protocol with Sophia. Although it presents a note of novelty regarding the international and joint staff of the Rome headquarters. We are actually currently working on organizing a BLSD session of courses, in courses that are internationally certified by the American Heart Association, and that will be offered to all the staff on a regular basis, also in order to take into account the frequent turnover of the personnel. So we are ready to resume also our training activities whenever the conditions will be fine. So we are at the disposal of course, of Med and Operation Irini. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, we promised to make this brief. I hope that we have contributed a little bit to raise more awareness about such huge issues. I think that we have highlighted a number of important topics. Let me stress again the two main words: the role of cooperation and partnership, even competition in a good way, that could help to build up a strategy, a shared strategy at international level. But also, let me stress again the issue of the narrative. We mentioned there is a toxic narrative. We need more facts, and also the capacity of people to really understand what's going on and put migration in a global picture. So let me thank all the speakers, because it was really difficult to discuss such huge things in such a small allocated time. But I think that we succeeded in doing this. So I don't know if Admiral Martinet would like to say something before closing.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you all again for your very high quality, for the very high quality of your explanation during this very interesting webinar. Your contribution will be very useful for Irini, allowing us to better develop our operational activities. It's clear that addressing migration and illicit trafficking is a complex problem. It requires a holistic approach, a global approach to be solved, and whatever solution are provided, people must always be at the center of our concern. The solution can also only happen through cooperation between governmental and non-governmental organizations and actors. And contributing to this cooperation is precisely one of the objectives of the Shared Awareness and Deconfliction meeting organized by Irini. in which I invite you to participate or to follow, because this year it will be in presence, but also broadcast on social media. Thanks again for your participation to this webinar.
Thank you, Admiral. Let me take the initiative to fix a new appointment with all of them next year to look at improvements of what we are doing in our respective roles. And good luck to Emanuele Re for a new appointment. Thank you very much to everybody, and thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.